Afternoon, everyone. It's Leah Nord from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. I'm the Senior Director of Workforce Issues and Inclusive Growth here at the Chamber, and would like to welcome everybody this afternoon. We're just doing a little bit of tweaking here with one of our speakers who can get in by audio, but does not seem to be able to have the camera showing, so we're just working on that. As we do that, I'll just open here with a few pieces. What I will say is that it would be appreciated if everyone on the line and here virtually would ensure to mute themselves. If you're on the phone, that's as easy as pushing the mute button. And if you're here on our platform this afternoon, there's a button on the very left. As we go into question and answers, we'll ask you to unmute. That's quite easy to do. But in the meantime, we'll just ask you to do that just to decrease the bandwidth and the background noise here this afternoon. I will this afternoon begin with a land acknowledgement, acknowledging the Indigenous people of all lands that we are on today. While we meet here virtually on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land which we all call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this nation home. In doing so, it is important to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we are and can each, in our own way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. You can keep the screen up for me this afternoon, Rebecca. I would like to welcome everyone this afternoon to this session hosted by the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in partnership with EDC. We'd like to thank EDC this afternoon for their sponsorship and all the work that they have supported going into this. The objective of this session is to discuss how Indigenous and non-Indigenous companies across Canada can work together to seize new export opportunities. In the wake of COVID-19, many companies have had to reinvent themselves, seeking new customers, new supplies, and new international markets. Forging new business partnerships can support the pivots toward this more sustainable, innovative business model. Working together, Indigenous and non-Indigenous companies can better tackle current challenges, win new customers, and prepare for the post-COVID recovery phase. Members who I will introduce I'll introduce them here today. I'll ask them to speak and make some opening remarks. We will have some moderated questions I'll start with, and then we will move to questions from the floor. In the first instance, we're going to take them from the floor here. There is a button on the bottom panel there to raise your hand. I'll also turn our attention to the phone if that's what you would like to do as well, to make sure those speakers have a chance. I will also flag that we do have here up on the slide, we use the Slido app, and it's got the event code there. What you can do there is enter questions and also review the questions that other participants have added, upvoting those that you think are more important or more, you know, we triage them that way and I can read from there. So we'll do a variety of options here through the next hour and a half, and I look forward to a fruitful discussion. Just a couple of further logistics things here this afternoon, this morning, or later this afternoon, depending on where we find you across the country. First of all, I will indicate that we are recording the session. We will have this produced for those who cannot be here today but wanted to participate. The way it works though is that it's panel participants, and only those who are visual will be shown in the recording. I will also note that following this, there will be a report produced. We will share with everyone. The panelists will be attributed, otherwise it will not, comments will be revealed and discussed, but they will not be attributed. And a Chatham House rules would apply to part of that discussion to make those more comfortable. And I am just going to make sure, Todd, are you on the line?
See Todd in our list right now.
Okay, so I am going to proceed with introducing Todd was our first speaker, but we can also accordingly. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists here this afternoon. We have Todd Evans, who is the National Lead for Indigenous Exporters at EDC. Beth Perotti, who is the Director of Sustainability at New Gold. We have Patrick Watson, who's the Director of Public Policy at CCAB. And we have Alicia Dubois, who is the CEO of the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. We're just going to do one more check for Todd. Todd's still not on the line. So Beth, I'm going to ask you to open the remarks today and introduce yourself and New Gold just a little bit more if you could. Thank you very much. And with that, Rebecca, you can take down the slides so you have the full screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm so glad that I could participate in this roundtable. As Leah mentioned, my name is Beth Perotti, and I am the current Director of Sustainability with New Gold. New Gold is an intermediate gold mining company that is solely based in Canada at the moment. So we have an operation out in BC and an operation in Northern Ontario. And we are mining for gold and copper and some silver when it presents itself. Under the sustainability portfolio, my responsibilities span from working with our environment teams to regulators to our permitting, as well as overseeing our community and Indigenous relations across the company, with a big focus on that being how we partner with Indigenous businesses that surround our operation. So I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. I'm looking forward to the questions that will be asked, both moderated and from the floor, because I believe that there's a lot that we can share from the mining industry, but there's also a lot for us to learn on how we can incorporate Indigenous businesses even more into our supply chains and our export chains. So I'm very glad to be here today.
Thank you, Beth. Patrick, over to you.
Thank you very much, Leah. I just really want to thank the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and EDC for inviting the CCAB to attend today. Also want to send a special thanks to Leah. These things are not easy to put together, and she's really done a fantastic service of ensuring this event came together. So thank you very much, Leah, for all your very hard work and great leadership. So as Leah said, I am Patrick Watson. I'm the Director of Public Policy at the CCAB. What I share with you today is basically two main pieces of what the CCAB is doing to support Indigenous exporters. So one on learnings and one on guidance. So the learnings is essentially the research work that we do to inform sound government public policy and program design. So I see Jen Harper is joining us, which is fantastic. And Jen will tell you she attended an event last year in Ottawa where the CCAB launched a research report that we did in conjunction with Global Affairs Canada that showed that Indigenous small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs, are actually twice as likely to be exporters than non-Indigenous SMEs. And that caught a lot of people by surprise and has really allowed us to continue the conversation how we can best support Indigenous exporters, especially now as we're moving towards economic recovery. We've also done a lot of research work to inform the good policy of other federal departments and provincial and territorial departments as well. And the second piece will be on guidance. So what the CCAB is doing is making those meaningful connections to drive export growth, whether it be to our colleagues at EDC, Business Development Canada, or BDC, Global Affairs Canada, but also with industry and associations such as UPS, eBay, and associations trade missions. So I think that's enough for now. I just wanted to say again, thank you everyone for joining. We look forward to participating in this wonderful discussion, for which
Thanks, Patrick. Alicia, over to you.
Thank you, Leah. It's a real pleasure to be here today. I see some familiar faces and names, which is always nice. So as Leah stated, I'm the CEO of the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. I'm also very proudly the co-chair of the board for the CCAB. And ultimately, I'm really pleased to be here because I recognize that we are all living through very unique circumstances with a combination of both COVID and the impact of COVID, but also for those of us who focus and live close to the energy sector, that is also a very challenging place where people are learning to pivot and do their best to deal with some very challenging times. In light of that, what I have seen, in addition to the challenges and in some instances real devastation for some families and businesses, is that we're starting to have very different conversations, and we're beginning to realize that to focus and be successful in Canada's economic recovery and moving forward in that way, that it's going to take partnerships. And so we see the traditional pillars of business and the way that business has been conducted as we created the economy that we all live within are not necessarily going to be the pillars that help us move into the future in a meaningful way. And I'm really proud to represent the mandate and the AIOC here today because it really is an example of the types of programs and mechanisms that will help Canada recover and also help Canada realize on its real potential economically. So with that, I'll just give a brief overview of the AIOC for those who don't know us, because we are in fact a brand new, first of its kind Crown corporation. We operate at arm's length of the Alberta government, although we are a creation of the Alberta government. And the full aim is really to facilitate access to capital and affordable borrowing also by virtue of the guarantees that we offer, and to foster Indigenous prosperity and ownership positions in resource development projects. So very specifically, we offer based upon two primary mechanisms. The first is that we have the capacity to provide up to $1 billion in loan guarantees for Indigenous investment in natural resource projects and related infrastructure. And so again, the focus here is that we are not the entity lending. We are in fact coming in to offer a backstop to the traditional form of borrowing that Indigenous groups would engage in through financial institutions. But through the guarantee from the government, it does generally enhance the affordability of the Indigenous group's investment and in fact supports the investment and ownership stake in the project. We have a range, so the minimum investment that we would support is 20 million. The maximum is 250 million, but in the event it's required for us to be relevant because a project is so large, there is potential for us to consider that maximum and aim to be more relevant in the event the project is in fact very large in value. So I'll leave it with that. We support Indigenous groups. Of course, that includes First Nations, Alberta Métis settlements, and then entities that are owned by them. We are not bound specifically to the jurisdiction of Alberta. We do have some flexibility, although there must be Alberta-based nations or Indigenous groups involved. And they must constitute, those Alberta-based entities must constitute at least 25% of the investment. But in recognizing that supporting natural resource and energy development may in fact require or call upon First Nations or Indigenous groups from outside of our jurisdiction, we wanted to make sure that that was honored and we have the ability to support Indigenous groups outside of Alberta. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the three of you so far. That was a great overview, and I appreciate the conciseness as well, because we're going to get into a lot more detail through the course of the discussion. However, before we do move to that point, I'm happy to see that Todd has overcome the technical difficulties. Todd, we've started here. We've had our other three speakers, Beth, Patrick, and Alicia, introduce themselves, and I hand the floor over to you now.
Well, my apologies. So finally, on the third device, I managed to get through. Laptop didn't work, iPad didn't work, but I tried the phone, and the phone was working. Anyway, so again, my apologies. So I'm not sure what people had to say at the beginning, but I can just give you a little bit of background on EDC, what we do, and kind of why this space is so important for us. So as mentioned, my name is Todd Evans. I'm the National Lead for Indigenous Exporters here at EDC. We are a Crown corporation. Whose basic job really is to help Canadian companies grow their exports and succeed in markets around the world. And more recently, we expanded our mandate or commitment to supporting and engaging with Indigenous businesses and working with our partners like the CCAB, with CANDO, with NACA and ITAC and other organizations. And our goal here is to better understand sort of the unique characteristics of Indigenous businesses and also the unique challenges that Indigenous companies are up against. And so there's two basic ways that we help companies export their products and services. First, increasing their access to capital, and secondly, it's reducing their risk. And through those two kind of core parts of our mandate, so that's how we kind of structure our services. And we do that through four basic areas. One, all of our insurance products, and hopefully later on I'll get an opportunity to talk about one of them in particular. All of our financing products, our loan guarantees, all of it access to working capital, lines of credit, operating lines. And also, just as important as having access to financial resources is access to knowledge resources. So we've been investing a lot in our knowledge resources over the last 3 to 4 years. And again, as we get into the moderated discussion, I can expand on some of that. And also, we have our Connections program. It's really about bringing sort of Canadian suppliers into foreign supply chains. And we have a program, almost like a matchmaking service in place for that. And so, during my, I guess, 23 years at EDC, I've seen firsthand how exporting companies typically do better than sort of their non-exporting counterparts. I won't get into all the statistical details around that, but they have greater diversification in their sales and customer base, and that generates greater revenues on average. And by exporting, companies are able to build a much more resilient and sustainable business model, one that's better able to withstand the ups and downs of the business cycle. And keep in mind, we know for many of our Indigenous communities, Indigenous companies, this kind of resiliency and sustainability is especially relevant, again, for those communities who are looking to become more self-reliant. We also see that exporting companies pay higher wages, employ more skilled workers, and that's just not just a benefit for the company, but also for the overall community where they're located. And finally, exporters have more access to global resources, technology, and insights on the latest customer trends around the world. And so in this current COVID environment, we see exporting as a very effective strategy for Indigenous companies who are looking to pivot their business and restructure in preparation for that eventual economic recovery. And as part of that pivot, we know many companies, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike, are looking for new customers, new sources of supply, new technologies and new markets. And the odds of kind of a successful reorientation of your business increase significantly when you look at what's available beyond the Canadian market. I guess if you look at on the flip side, we know COVID has been a massive shock to global supply chains, and we now see that many Canadian and foreign companies are also restructuring their business and looking for new suppliers to diversify their procurement and supply chains. And I guess COVID and everything that's happened sort of with those supply chains has really highlighted the risk associated with just-in-time manufacturing, concentrated supply chains, keeping low inventories. I think we can all remember how hard it was to find toilet paper a few months ago. And again, that's just a reflection of how supply chains are being run so tight, to reduce costs, low inventories, which meant fewer suppliers, fewer inventories, and just couldn't respond to that shock. So companies are revisiting this production model, and many are and will be looking for new sources of procurement, new sources of supply. They'll be holding larger inventories and expanding their supplier base. So we see opportunities for a lot of Indigenous companies to kind of tap into that, whether it's mining, forestry, agriculture, seafood, processed foods, manufacturing goods, and also a whole range of different kinds of services can benefit from that reorientation, transportation, construction, education, and technology, to name a few. So, I mean, the time is right to start preparing for this eventual recovery, and also the time is right to start looking for partners between sort of our non-Indigenous and Indigenous business communities. Thanks very much, and thanks again for bearing with me.
Thanks, Todd. And I think to build off of this last point in the discussion and that which consumes all of us today at different stages and phases and machinations across the country is this pandemic that has affected us globally. And I'll just say, this morning I was looking at some statistics. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce partnered with Stats Canada on something called the Canadian Survey of Business Conditions. Stats Can surveyed back in May, again in July, and is just in the field now. Results will be available in November, and looking at a whole range of things and at different points in time. And what we at the Chamber believe is, we've been tracking, revenue loss and pieces like that, but on the positive side, this is really the story of resiliency and innovation of the business community. And Stats Canada actually has been tracking stats by business owner, a series or a range of what we call diversity business owners. So I was looking at the most recent stats coming out of July, and if we look at the story of innovation and resilience. We surveyed business owners on different innovations and how they've changed their business model. And what we would say is not only did the general business population across the board innovate. If you take a look at Indigenous-owned businesses, their innovation levels were actually higher than the national average. And I noted some of the areas here. For example, in altering methods of production and altering products or services, and as well as investing in new commitment, for example. And what we've been doing at the Chamber as we go forward as well is really monitoring now that some of the country is opening up. Some of us are opening up and having to take a step back. We're very concerned about what we're calling a K-shaped recovery through this. So monitoring stats and monitoring different delineations to make sure, all businesses and all industries and all sectors have been affected, some more than others. But even looking at business ownership cohorts to make sure that you don't have some that are rising and some that are falling as well. We didn't see that through the July results necessarily, but as we go forward, we're closely monitoring that, just especially because government has provided sort of for individuals and business blanket services, and wanting to see if there's areas or special niches that will have to be addressed. So when we do look at the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, it is having a disproportional aspect on different communities and on different businesses. Are there any specific strategies you would recommend for companies looking to restructure their business and prepare for an eventual recovery? You know what, Todd, because you had spoken to this, I'll start with you, and then we'll open the floor to other members as well. But I know you spoke to that a bit at the end, but is there anything you'd want to add as well?
I mean, it's no secret that Indigenous companies have been heavily impacted by COVID-19. Particularly when we look at some sectors like tourism, retail, transportation. And with thin resources as well. If you look at some of the mining and energy companies in those supply chains, they've been hit quite significantly as well. And another thing we've seen too, with the shutdown, we've seen a lot of First Nations and other Indigenous communities having to shut down their gaming operations, shutting down their resort operations. Big negative impact on revenues, and it's difficult to make those revenues, to make up for those losses. But there are, I think, some strategies, things that companies can do to start preparing now for that eventual recovery. First of all is that, understand your business, know your numbers, start building a cash flow forecasting model, understand, what's coming in and what's going out, and build a plan B and a plan C, because it could be a wall before we get through this. It's also important to have an online presence. Whether or not you're selling your goods or services online, you still need to be seen in the marketplace. Companies might be looking for partners, looking for new suppliers, so you definitely need to be kind of coming up on those Google searches and having that online presence. We would definitely recommend getting your business certified as an Indigenous business, certified Indigenous business, either through an organization like CCAB or through CAMC. Again, it's getting your name out there, and you're able to tap into more opportunities. And excuse me, kind of looking out sort of longer term, sort of past the COVID. It's important to try to differentiate your product, not just be out there. Okay, it's just another company selling another widget. You got to focus on bringing value to your customer. That could mean branding. We know the Canadian brand is pretty good outside of Canada, and you kind of layer on that Indigenous brand. It's even has more cachet. It really does go a long way. I would also suggest start building up and start strengthening those partnerships you have, whether it's within your supply chain, within your sources of capital, your banking relationships, and also start thinking now about or building that export strategy. If you're not already exporting, maybe focus on one, possibly two markets at first, and kind of understand the market that you're going into. And there's a lot of resources available to help with that. Now, for any larger companies listening in, there's also, I think, strategies or things that they can do as well. Look at bringing more Indigenous suppliers into your supply chain. Kind of develop a sort of that your supplier diversity procurement plan. That looks at bringing in different partners. 56,000 Indigenous entrepreneurs in Canada. There's a lot to offer, and a lot of benefits from partnering with Indigenous companies. And again, for larger companies, where it's possible, bring your suppliers, your Canadian supply base into those global markets as well. So I'll end it there and turn it over to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. Beth, I just wanted to go to you next and see what you're seeing specifically from your sector and your locations as well.
Sure. I think, Todd, that was a great start to this conversation. I think in the mining industry, people saw through the news, there were operations who had to close down left, right, and center during COVID. We had to go down to care and maintenance. And I think specifically for New Gold, what that really highlighted for us were the holes in our supply chain, right from employees and not being able to have employees come to work or contractors' employees come to work because they lived or operated outside of the immediate area. It really showcased to us the need to be far more intentional about partnering with groups like EDC, like CCAB, like the government, to actually bring in and find the right Indigenous partners for not only our contracting needs, but also for our employment base and our contractor employers as well. Because it was one of the biggest learnings that we brought out was our CEO messaging again and again and again, we need to do better at training. We need to do better at going out and seeking out joint ventures for Indigenous and non-Indigenous businesses to work together to help with our operations, to help with value creation in the community. And I think that that's so profound and is a responsibility that the mining community, and I would say natural resources in general, that we really need to take on that responsibility. We have a lot to offer. We are doing a lot on our operations side, and it is imperative that we take the responsibility of partnering with Indigenous businesses seriously and find how we can make those partnerships work. And some of those will be big, some of those will go to possibly international exports, but we can even be looking at value creation in the communities for things that are not necessarily mine related or specific for the company. How are we supporting communities who have entrepreneurs, who have youth who want to be getting into setting up their own businesses? What does our company or our industry, how do we support those initiatives in a bigger way that then again enhances that talent pool and then gets people into those contracting firms or into the company to allow that bigger presence of Indigenous populations and Indigenous individuals in the industry? Because I think without it, I think any company who has gone through COVID will say that our Indigenous partners and our Indigenous employment base and our Indigenous suppliers carried us through COVID. Without them, we would have been absolutely lost because our supply chains got cut off left, right, and center from anyone coming in internationally. So we need to take that lesson very seriously and be much more intentional about improving those processes and systems as we move forward.
Leah, may I jump in?
It's really real. Yep, Patrick, go ahead, please, and then, yep.
Great, thank you very much. So just building on what my colleagues had to say, another great way to set yourself up for recovery is to attend webinars like this, because it can really help to showcase opportunities that might not be very well known. Because there are recent announcements by governments at every level to provide additional relief and recovery. So for instance, just last Friday, the Minister of Regional Economic Development, Minister Jolie, announced that there's an additional $600 million through the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund. I'll just say that one more time. So that's the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund. We did follow up with her department. Unfortunately, there is no Indigenous business set aside, though we obviously continue to advocate very strongly for that. So I would recommend that many of you out there draw down that information in an application. Of course, reaching out to your local Aboriginal financial institution is also very key to pull down any existing fundings or available fundings from the AFIs that came down from the Government of Canada, and also depending on which province or territory, and potentially being topped up by your province or territory. Also, too, just want to mention that there's a number of services that the private sector firms are also providing to help businesses recover through the pandemic, whether it be preferential shipping rates or also support to develop your online presence, as Todd put it earlier. So in terms of where do I go, though, to figure all this out, I really do want you to feel comfortable coming to the CCAB as well as your local AFIs. I know that my boss, Tyler the Bull, is real passionate about taking members' calls, taking Indigenous business calls. So am I, to do whatever we can to set you up for success, even if it's not about your export plan or shipping your goods overseas. We really are committed to doing what we can to support Indigenous business recovery. So I really do hope that you feel comfortable reaching out. My email address is pwatson@ccb.com. So feel free to reach out to me directly if you wish. I don't have the answer. Typically I don't. I certainly will pass you on to someone who does. We're not in the business of letting Indigenous businesses hang. We're in the business of supporting Indigenous business success.
Great, thanks. And I know a lot has been said there, but Alicia, before I go to the floor, I'm going to see if you wanted to add anything specifically to the pandemic focus or response, which is loaded, I appreciate, but...
Yes, well, I think that the comments about knowing your financials and also being not less reactionary and more focused on planning when looking for additional support or program relief is something that's very important. Having a number of different approaches ready at hand because you've done some of the analysis as to when each of them might be effective is a very good way to plan ahead. It's hard to tell where things are going to go. But the other thing too is everyone is pivoting, it seems. And so that means that you may be able to identify gaps that are new and developing. And it also may mean that with that evolution, there's additional competition where you might not have expected it. So in order to keep a good grasp on your business and your success, it's important to to be aware of the evolution of things around you and how that's going to impact you and your success. And again, I can't stress the partnerships enough. Putting yourself in a position to grow your networks and to rely on existing partnerships to do so is a very important component, I think, to surviving this very challenging time. And through those network pathways, the chances of you being able to enhance your business's reach and your presence within the segment that you operate in is going to be much more successful.
Great, thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to open the floor. I do see a hand. Just as I call, just introduce yourself. I would ask you to do that as you provide your questions or comments. Hands up, and we'll also go to the phone. Jason Thompson, I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, Jason Thompson, Superior Strategies Supply Service as well, recently launched Warrior Supplies. So we are one of very few 100% Indigenous owned and operated. It's important to stress operated supply businesses operating in Northern Ontario and Canada. I will tell you, I've been in business for 10 years doing health and safety training consulting, 2 years doing supplies, safety supplies, consumable supplies. You know, and I started my business because I was very active in the Chamber of Commerce locally and regionally, and I was fortunate enough to meet Mr. Jean-Jacques Herman. And I started my business, invested my life savings into the supply business because of the call from corporate Canada, because of the lack of Indigenous businesses. And, you know, being here in Northern Ontario, the call was from the mining sector, you know, power generation, whatever. We want Indigenous business. We're not seeing them. Where are they? So 2 years ago, I started my business. Very, very little response. It was rather ridiculous. And again, my perspective has always been, all I want is an opportunity. I'm not looking for a handout. And it was rather disheartening. I will share with you, kind of tongue in cheek here, is that COVID ultimately saved my business. And it was fortunate enough where I had access to COVID products, Health Canada approved products early on, and it ultimately saved my business. And my concern, though, I guess, my question and my concern is for everyone on the call here is that, you know, as supply chains to some degree normalize, whatever normal looks like, is, you know, people reached out to us because of almost necessity. Now that things are normalizing, some of the folks, and I hate to say it, but New Gold is one of them, that when I went calling after to say we have other products and other offerings, that it was the cold shoulder again, because everybody had products. The normal supply lines had products. So my fear here now is we've seen a nice bump in customers. You know, we probably picked up 250, 300 new customers, but when things get going again, you know, is it going to go back to the old ways of doing business where you go back to your traditional supply lines, right? We were fortunate that we were able to pivot, you know, at the start of COVID, and we're able to demonstrate that we can deliver, right? And, you know, like I said, that's my fear ultimately. And I'm very happy to say that we have 16 employees working for us. 90% are Indigenous and 90% are females. And, you know, some of the greatest workers that you can ask for. I got a great team. And, you know, that is my fear, though. That is my fear that there's a call out there, and I applaud the CCAB and everything they're doing, but, you know, this needs to be measured. And, you know, are we measuring those results, and are we doing enough, right? Because, you know, I'm going to tell you honestly, like I've seen the calls out from the Hydro Ones, but I'm not seeing the rewards, I guess, right? So thanks for your time.
Jason, thanks. And just before I open the floor, can I ask you whereabouts you're based out of in Northern Ontario?
Thunder Bay.
Great, thank you. Beth, I think I'll hand it over to you first, and then open to our other panelists here as well, and others who do want to make a comment here from, you know, all participants' experiences, you know, ideas about sustainability. But Beth, please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Jason, for bringing that up and for calling New Gold out specifically. I think that, you know, we've talked a lot at the beginning of this call for what can Indigenous businesses do to get past COVID, but I think the other side of that coin is what are we doing as industry and as companies to also meet in the middle and actually pull up our socks and actually level up in how we are doing supply. And so I know when it comes to when we were looking at our supply chain during COVID, there was a lot of unknown and there was a lot of uncertainty as to what we needed, if our operation would reopen. All of those questions were all in play. And so I can't speak directly to the experience you had during the last few months, but I can say I would like to continue this conversation with you afterwards to see what can happen, because I do think the way we do business does need to change. I think, like most mining companies, we do have a lot of agreements with Indigenous communities surrounding our operations that are the immediately impacted communities. Within our operations, a lot of those communities do have first opportunity to bid and to access a lot of our contracts that do go out. So depending on what the service is, there could be competition there, or there could be preferential treatment to the communities that we are partnered with already. But saying that, as I started this call, we are looking at how to expand that. We need to bring in more Indigenous businesses into our supply group. If you're telling me you have experience, doing that, that you're 90% Indigenous employees, that you are female focused, like all of those things are just like checking off so many boxes in my head as to, oh my goodness, we need to be speaking to this guy. And so I think there is an accountability, whether that be CCAB, whether that be some other group that does data tracking. I think companies do need to be held more accountable. We do need to have our procurement and our supply chains scrutinized and looked at, and making sure that we are partnering locally and we are partnering with Indigenous communities. Particularly companies like New Gold, who operate solely in Canada. There's no excuse for us to not be looking at those opportunities. Will that mean change? Yes. Will some people not be happy about all of those shifts and changes because there's process set up already? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that it's not doable and that there aren't champions within the industry who are really pushing for this to happen. So again, I would love to connect with you directly afterwards. I'd love to connect with you with some of our procurement people who are on our site up in Rainy, because I think it's opportunities like that if they were missed, it's worth going back and having that conversation again and getting back on the table, and both the company being the Indigenous company being persistent, but also the company, mining company, oil, gas, whoever it may be, also making sure that those conversations happen both at a national and local level.
Thank you.
Thanks. Patrick, Beth did mention CCAB, not that you have to. Did you want to add anything? And then I'll go to Alicia and then Todd.
Thank you, Leah. So I just want to say, Jason, thank you very much for sharing today. Obviously, you've had many conversations with us. You're a CCAB member. Really do appreciate that. So your story is very well known within our organization, and I can tell you that your story is very well known within the government of Canada. But it's about how do they act? How do we drive that change? So what I'd encourage people as a bit of a challenge today is we really do need more stories like Jason. And you know that there's a 5% target that the government of Canada has set for themselves. And now the CCAB is pushing very hard for the government of Canada to actually fill that mandate letter commitment. So the more stories we have, I mean, we did research work to support the case that COVID-19 has had a tremendously detrimental impact for Indigenous businesses. That's very well known. So we have the sort of data, but we also need those human and personal stories to really put a face to those numbers. So again, Jason, I really do appreciate you sharing, and any of you on the line, or if you have friends and family who also have stories of that, please feel comfortable sharing that with the CCAB so that we can then do an even better job of advocating for positive change. Thank you.
No, thank you. If I can, that's always been kind of a bone of contention, for us. I see our president of the Anishinaabe Business Professional Association is also on this call, Jason Razovich. I guess the challenge is I am very much a doer. I am not someone who sits back and twiddles my fingers, right, and toes. And But the unfortunate thing in reality is a lot of our business owners and our communities are not as aggressive as I am, and they will sit back and opportunities will pass them by, right? So we need to give those folks a voice. And if I can lend a hand, like I say, when I speak, I don't speak for myself. I'm speaking for the other folks who've invested in business with the dreams. And I feel for the people right now who are struggling with COVID, who are losing life's investments and closing down, and people are losing employees and so on and so forth. So I feel for that. And but you know what? Like I said, I think the future for Canada, especially in the resource sector in Northwestern Ontario, for sure is very bright, and we want to be a part of it. And it's as simple as that, right?
Thanks. And Alicia, did you want to add to that?
Sure. And Jason, the comment about wanting to be part of it is something that I hear on a regular basis, because of course that's the platform that has been created and that I get to drive, is participation. And it is hard to see the impacts of COVID and the economic downturn, but you're not the first person that I've heard say that it was in some ways a blessing, because it has turned traditional business on its head. It's giving us the impetus and the incentive to look collectively very differently at the way we drive our economy and the different roles that people play and businesses play within that. And so, and then interestingly on top of it, in recent years, we've seen the idea of inclusion and diversity being something that is, very key from a conversation perspective and focus when it comes to corporate Canada. And with the economic downturn and having to look for innovative solutions, we see that this desire to look toward ESG solutions and the pressures with respect to socially responsible investment, et cetera, is really going to provide an opportunity for very important shifts for us in Canada, and especially for Indigenous peoples in Canada. Mm-hmm. And what I love about that is that we're driving for the first time a much more inclusive economy. And it's important that we keep our eyes on that ball, because it's very easy to slip back to old habits, old traditions, old practices. And it's important for us to keep each other accountable, right? And that's also something that, just by virtue of the platform and the fact that we are looking to be a bridge between Indigenous groups and resource development, and ensuring that there's a seat at the table for Indigenous groups when it comes to resource development. That seat at the table is key, right? The governance table is where strategic avenues and thought processes happen. That's where you have the most meaningful conversations when it comes to Indigenous hiring practices, supply chain practices, and diversity across all policies that drive a business forward. So I am encouraged, actually, because while this new paradigm that we're living in is very challenging in some respects, I think that it's giving us a much stronger collective inclusive focus. And I think from that, we're going to see a much better balance from an economic equality perspective. So I appreciate your comments. I'm glad that you've shared your experience.
Miigwech, thank you.
Miigwech.
Yes, thank you. And for those on the telephone who can't see the visual, all you can see across the screens right now is everyone nodding in agreement. So thanks for that, Alicia. And I'm going to move on, but just before I do, Todd, I want to give you the floor in case, not everyone has to answer every question, but I also want to give the opportunity.
Well, it's great comments, and thanks very much, Jason. That's a big part for us too, is to come and listen to like stories like yours, so that we can learn. And I know at EDC, supplier diversity is a big thing, and like much of the federal government, there's a lot more that we can do and will be doing. I would just again reiterate, as Alicia and others have mentioned, we are seeing sort of a big shock to the system. Things are changing, supply chains are changing. And will it go back to the way it was before? Maybe. If we get a vaccine next week, you might see some of that happen. But I think a lot of the changes we're seeing will be permanent. And from EDC's perspective, our viewpoint is that don't dismiss the opportunities that are outside of Canada. And in many ways, you can tap into those opportunities. And by all means, like the other callers, feel free to contact me directly, and then we can talk a little bit more about some of the options if you like.
So I'm going to give an opportunity again. At any point, anyone here virtually who has a question can, put up your hand, or even if one of these is great as well. But I just want to make sure I'm looking at Slido here. I've got some questions I'm going to ask from that. But does anybody on the phone? I want to give anybody on the phone the opportunity to speak if they wish. Okay. At any point, I'll do that at various points as well. I'm looking over at the Slido app, and some of the questions we have is about supports here or there, but we do have one specific here that I'm going to ask in the first instance. I'll try and group them around themes, but the question is, can anyone speak specifically to exporting Indigenous renewable energy?
I can take a crack at that if people are in agreement. Yeah. So I mean, like I was mentioning earlier, there is a big shake-up happening. There is demand within Canada. What we're seeing that growing participation of Indigenous companies in the economy, all aspects of the economy. And one of those happen to be renewable energy. There are definitely opportunities for investing, not just the energy itself, but the technology behind that energy. And we're seeing that across the board. If you look at our clean tech program, so lots of great opportunities behind that. And when it comes to renewable energy in particular, I guess there's a couple things that we can point out there. One is that a lot of energy projects in Canada, there's a couple of things that we see happening around trying to encourage participation in that. And stop me if I'm getting a little bit off topic here. This goes back to kind of export opportunities in general, and some of the sort of the gaps and obstacles to that. One is around how do we increase Indigenous participation in these kinds of projects? And I'm talking about all kinds of projects: mining, forestry, energy, agriculture, and clean tech is a part of that. Particularly the clean tech that's kind of land intensive, wind energy, solar energy. What we're seeing is that a lot of companies, Indigenous companies and Indigenous communities, First Nations, Dev Corps that want to participate in these programs, the issue is how do they raise capital to take an equity position? So we're seeing that's an issue. The financial structures in Canada are not really geared towards bringing Indigenous companies into those big projects, but it's something that, in my opinion, can be addressed just by working with our financial institutions and bringing in some of the sort of financial crown corporations, be it an EDC, a BDC, or FCC, that can bring in some kind of backstop to that. But for that caller in particular, we have a dedicated clean tech team. We have account managers that work in that sector. So by all means, I would encourage you to reach out to me directly, and I can put you in touch to the people that we have on the ground working with clean tech and renewable energy companies across Canada, and they can certainly speak to your situation, speak to the industry much better than I can.
Thanks, Todd. Did anyone else want to add anything to that, or?
I'll add something really quickly. This is less for export and more just for industry. I know for operations in Canada, mining specific natural resources, clean tech is at the top of everyone's conversation list on how to bring in renewable energies, how to just monitor our energy use, bring in solar, bring in wind, whatever it may be. And we've had some conversations with some Indigenous groups, particularly around bringing in solar energy. But just as Todd said, we've always run into a barrier of financing it and what the use is, and ensuring that if we're setting it up, it's not specifically for one operation, but it is a sustainable business. And so I think with understanding what type of opportunities on the financing side are out there through whether it be EDC or groups like them, there's certainly a conversation happening in the industry right now that clean energy is the way we're all moving, and we're all trying to find what that solution is. And so again, bringing that back, it's not an export, but it is a conversation that is happening in Canada for Canadian mining on how we look at our energy use and what consumables we are using on the energy side.
Else?
If I can make a very quick point there, we often talk about what constitutes an export and what's not an export. You know, traditionally an export was something that we looked at. If you can drop it on your foot, that's it. You know, okay, we can export that. But the exports have become a very gray area. So you take a sector like clean tech. So at EDC, we look at sort of a broad definition of what constitutes an export. We'll actually look at an export supply chain. So if you're a company further back in that export supply chain, and you're providing some kind of good or input or service to a larger exporter, no matter what sector they're in, be it mining, agriculture, or big infrastructure project, you're considered an exporter. And what that does, it opens up your company to use all of the services, the financing, insurance products, and knowledge services that EDC has available. So if you're clean providing, you may not be selling directly to, say, a buyer in the United States or elsewhere, but you're selling your clean tech energy or your clean tech technology to a renewable energy technology to a company that's then exporting it. We consider you as part of that export business, and we would work with you just like we would any other exporter. I just wanted to clarify that for people.
Leah, do you mind if I jump in just very briefly?
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to stop conversation when we're talking about. Todd hit on a good point that traditionally, if you drop it on your foot, that's an export, right? But it's also about knowledge and also pursuing conversations about trade and services too. And what I was able to find with my work with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development and meeting Indigenous business owners literally around the world is that they're also in the business of selling their knowledge and selling, how do I set up a clean tech company? How do I set up a manufacturing facility? So when you're thinking about business recovery, you have my back pocket. Yeah, you might have your widget, but you also have the knowledge of how to develop that widget or how to sell that widget, and there's value to that. So I just want to ensure that we're having a conversation here today about exports and supporting Indigenous business growth and recovery writ large. Let's also think about the services side, the knowledge side, and how you can potentially monetize that if that's something that you want to do.
Great, Patrick. That's a good point. Thanks for adding that as well. And again, looking at some questions here, we've looked at it sort of sector or by sector question there. I'm going to turn the question here to a geographical one. Some had talked about picking a market or two, but there is a theme through some of the questions that have been received about the U.S., breaking into the U.S. market, and a question here about how USMCA has impacted Indigenous business in Canada, challenges and opportunities. So if I could open the floor to panelists and anyone else who might have a comment as well, please feel free to raise your hand. Thanks. Patrick, go ahead.
Thank you. So maybe I'll start with a specific example and then writ large. So you stop me if I geek out a little too much, because this is a real area of passion of mine. So under the new CUSMA or USMCA, basically the new NAFTA, there is a provision under Article 6 that speaks to handmade traditional folklore or Indigenous handcrafted goods. So the government of Canada has really touted this as a big opportunity for Indigenous businesses. So CCB is going deep with the Government of Canada, specific global affairs, to say, what does that really mean in practice? Because if you actually read the text itself, it's very, very specific about it has to be made by hand, it's apparel goods, it's textile goods. So it's not necessarily as broad as maybe others have made it out to be. But I mean, we still want to consider that, you know, this is a free trade agreement with the world's largest market. There are a number of missions or consulate generals, embassies, what have you, in the United States, where you can go as a port of call. These are global affairs missions with trade commissioners who really know their particular region. One that I really point out, because I've had some dealings with her, is Dino Santos in Dallas. She's one that really gets it in terms of the Indigenous element. And she has a fantastic network of what they refer to themselves as Indigenous tribes in Oklahoma and her particular region. So I would very much encourage you to reach out directly to some of these trade commissioners in the U.S. But again, if you're looking for a warm introduction, this is something that I personally am very happy to do on your behalf. Also, it gives me an opportunity to have a conversation with you and learn a little more about your business and say, okay, well, setting yourself up for that conversation with someone else at one of the missions in the U.S., like, you know, maybe you want to put it to them this way, or maybe you want to drive your product or service in that way. So I think that's where CCB has a little bit of a value to add. Of course, connecting you as well with my good friend Todd Evans and others. But in terms of the U.S. market, it's important to know the resources that you have available. There's no cost to have a conversation with the trade commissioner. So all to say that, yeah, this is a new NAFTA, but it's still, you know, a free trade agreement like we've had before with the U.S. market. It's just a matter of, you know, what's that first step, and I very much welcome if the first step is to give me a call or shoot me an email to have that conversation.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to jump in? Okay. Well, I'm going to try something a little bit different here, and my question is actually not for the panelists. It's for the floor.
That's great.
Sorry, Todd. Go ahead.
If I can take the opportunity just to build on what.
Sorry, Todd. I do apologize. There's a bit of a delay.
Sorry,
with
yeah.
you.
I was just
Yeah. So no problem, Todd.
Just what Patrick was saying.
Yeah. Just speak slowly, Todd. Just because there's a little bit of delay with you. That would be great. Go ahead. Unfortunately, Todd is frozen now. I jinxed it. Oh, you're okay. Go ahead. No, I definitely jinxed it, Todd. You're frozen again. He's going to jump off, and we'll let Todd speak.
Coming originally from Newfoundland, that's a little bit hard for me to do. So.
Okay, now we have you. I'm going to go ahead.
Yeah. Just I'm building on what Patrick had said. Again, yeah, just to make a quick point that if anyone is listening and they do have interest, I see you shaking your head, Leah.
You're okay now.
Is it still working? With the issue, but just very quickly. So if anyone is interested in the U.S. market, by all means, you can reach out to me directly if you like, and I'll put you in touch with one of our account managers, one of our U.S. market experts, and they can walk you through the steps and all the ins and outs of the nuances of selling into the U.S. And you know, for many of our customers, smaller customers, and you know, sort of larger ones too, the U.S. is a good training ground for, you know, getting that experience with exporting and comfort, and about 2/3 of our clients are in the U.S. and then move to other markets after that.
Great, thanks, Todd, and I'm glad you managed to get that through. As I had mentioned, though, I'm going to try this, and this is actually a question for the people, our participants across the floor, for the panelists to hear. But the question is, what can governments and corporations do to provide more opportunities for Indigenous communities across Canada, both in business here, but specifically related to exports and providing, investment options, jobs, sustainability, so on and so forth. Is anyone from the floor want to proffer some ideas or comments?
I can. Actually, we are going through that process right now, I guess. So Todd will be reaching out to you for sure. So I was very fortunate to be working with a Canadian manufacturer of hand sanitizer, sanitizing wipes. Just got a DIN number for disinfecting wipes, so we're launching Warrior wipes here. Well, we have Warrior wipes sanitizing wipes already launched. Disinfecting wipes. So we're looking to get these into the U.S. markets, and it's not something I've done a lot of. So we'll definitely need a hand. I'm not sure all the ins and outs, and I'm not very familiar with the path forward there. But any resources that are there to help, we're definitely taking advantage of it. To be fully honest with you, though, it's tough, right? Like every day is a challenge, and I don't care where you're from, what color you are. As a small business owner, every day is challenging. It's fun, it's exciting, but it's also stressful. and we're all trying to do a lot with limited resources, right? And but you look at the U.S. as a potentially huge market in the rest of the world, and just having resources and people willing to spend the time and effort to help us navigate those paths forward would be of definite value. And like I said, it's for me, I spend a lot of time trying to educate, probably, much of corporate Canada and the different industries that, for us being in the supply side, having to educate and almost prove yourself that you are more than capable of delivering, products, right? And all due respect to the folks that are making crafts and that sort of thing, I think we as Indigenous business people have a lot more to offer, and oftentimes are faced with different stereotypes that we have to move past. But like I said, if any help we can get, it's definitely of value for sure.
Jason, I see that Jennifer Harper has raised her hand. If you want to unmute yourself and take the floor, that would be great. Thank you.
Oops, there we go. So just to echo Jason's thoughts, that it's truly challenging for all of those facets of small business. There's so many things that we're constantly worrying about. And I think adding exporting into any country is just sort of adding more onto that giant plate of worries and things that we have to do. But my issue and concern, I think, right now is, when you see that list or those items of what it means for Indigenous products, and when they talked about if it's handcrafted or handmade, and then those certain rules apply to those items or artists, we're a brand that is literally creating new formulations using massive amounts of innovation. And how is that still not considered an Indigenous made item or good? And why would we not get the benefits of the same as one of those artisans importing something when we've put our heart and soul into making a lipstick? So that is just my point on that. And, there was a call out. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this, but it's called the 15% pledge, where actually a group of people have asked Canadian retailers and US retailers to start to carry people of color or anyone from the bio community, including Indigenous people, their goods in their stores. The reality is, we've been approached by every major Canadian retailer. It is completely unfathomable at the cost to go on Canadian retail shelves, and impossible for a small brand to even consider that without enormous amount of funding coming from somewhere. And so as much as that's great, those calls go out, perhaps the people in power could create new systems and change the cost of entry, because it's absolutely impossible for someone to afford the Shoppers Drug Mart of, pay the $250,000 to get into their stores and be on their shelves. If you're a small Canadian business just starting out as we are, that's impossible.
And is there any other comments from the floor right now? Do any of the panelists want to react to them? I do have another question here, and it might be one, Alicia, for you, but it might be another one that the answers will need to come from the floor as well. The question is, are there conversations with other provinces to have similar provincial crown corporations specific to Indigenous business like the one in Alberta?
Yes, so that's a very good question. And it's interesting because that's certainly my intention, is to have those conversations, because it is thought leadership, and it's an opportunity for government, corporate Canada, and Indigenous people to have aligned objectives and to seriously drive regional economic development. And that's the beautiful echo effect of this mandate, is that while we're driving Indigenous prosperity through investment in medium to large scale projects, the regional economy gets the benefit of that business, of that project. And so it ends up serving everybody within the vicinity of the project. And what's really important here is, in order for Canada to realize its potential economically, we do need to have more of these positive partnerships. Investors from all over the world are looking for places to invest where there's not reputational risks presented, and of course the tensions that we have created in a have-not economy is such that we see these tensions bubble up, and it in fact keeps all of Canada from realizing the benefit of investment, which as a resource development-based nation, we lean on in order to see success and to have a certain standard of living and quality of life. The sooner we, as business people, as Indigenous people, as governments, begin to come to the table together, the more that positive and enhanced quality of living is shared with everybody, the more cooperative the conversations are, the more investors are interested in us, not just because of ESG considerations and socially responsible investment considerations, but because we no longer present a reputational risk. Like, these partnerships are pivotal to Canada's economic success. Like, leave recovery alone. We're in a new era, and you know, it's the way forward. So like, I hear, it makes me sick, Jen, to hear that those are the barriers that you face. You know, and people don't know that. So here I find it interesting that you have consumers speaking, right? Speaking, and this is the investment pressure. It looks different, but it's ultimately the same. So you have this pressure to have an inclusive stock, an inclusive shelf, an inclusive offering that gives people choices. And yet there's still these systemic barriers built by traditional business that keep that diversity from seeing itself through to fruition, even though it's what the dollars that drive business are asking for. It's astounding to me, and it's almost at every turn. And I'm going to go back again. The importance of having qualified Indigenous people who understand business, who have insight to bring, sitting on boards and helping make strategic decisions that break down barriers like that are really, really key. And it's time for us to also diversify who those people are. Like we see in our country who gets invited to sit on boards, and it's usually the usual suspects. And, and I know I worked for CIBC and, and I was part of the executive team. And so anything Indigenous came to me, people wanted to hear what I had to say. I'm one Indigenous person with one lived experience. Like I can't speak for all of Indigenous people. I mean, it's good to have at least a voice, but it's so important for corporate Canada to recognize the need to have diversity of voices. We don't see what we can't address what we don't see. We don't understand our own gaps. So anyway, I hope that answered the question.
I would even like to open the floor to everyone and push on this a bit further, because I will say it's a bit of, I couldn't think of the word, boomerang. Jen, you had made those comments and I moved to the next question and then it kind of hit me on the way back. But I think it blended nicely, and this is the whole idea of, networking or partnerships and, the non-Indigenous, working together. I hear what you've said about boards, absolutely, right? What are some other people's experiences or ideas or thoughts on really making that meaningful and breaking down those systemic barriers?
Alicia, if I can, Alicia touched on it very, very well. It's interesting, as an Indigenous business, we're still dealing every day, and I think a lot of mainstream businesses don't realize that as an Indigenous business, we're still dealing with the ramifications of the residential schools and the 150 years of despair. It's a part of our business every day. The politics, as much as we try to leave politics out, especially for economic development corps, that sort of thing, it's a part of every day, right? And it's unfortunate, and it's still the trauma, the lateral violence we see even as business owners. We experience it. Mainstream business may not realize it, but we experience it. People, it's not because they purposely want to discourage you. It's almost unintentional, but it happens, right? And it's unfortunate. And I always try to look past it. I'm going, it's not, I don't blame the people when they're sitting there going, oh, you're this big business owner, you got millions of dollars sitting there. And I'm like, no. I said, you don't realize the sleepless nights I have to worry about making payroll and that sort of thing for my employees. I said, and that's the education, and that's all part of being a business owner, right? And I bear that responsibility. But there's a lot of different barriers that people do not see. Mainstream business does not see, and it's again, there's a lot of different things, and it's all about education. And I think that's why we're here today, is to educate people and say, you know what? Like I said, nobody here is looking for a handout. I've never asked for a handout. All I look for is an opportunity. Invite me to the dance, and it's up to me to dance, and we got to deliver. And like I said, I'm inspired by the people I see here. I want to inspire the next generation of folks, because I think, collectively, we're all better off. And I think we all share those same sentiments, right? And the future is definitely bright. Are there going to be a lot of hurdles along the way? Definitely, a lot of bumps and bruises for sure. And, please don't take any of my comments negatively, because that's not the way they are. It's more for education. But we need to learn from our mistakes. We need to move forward. We need to accept, the criticism. I accept the criticism, but, when it comes to, to doing business, like Alicia mentioned, we need more people at the table. We need more voices. My story is much different than, the person down the road. I think most of us who work with Indigenous businesses realize that every community is different. Every community is different. It could be 20 minutes down the road. It's different. It's different community, different values. And, I feel for our remote communities, because their challenges are far greater than mine are. And, like I said, it's learning. Like we're getting, I see improvements every day, and I'm very grateful for that. Still a long ways from where we should be, but there's a lot of positive things happening as well. Thank you.
Yeah, no, this is good. And in the time that we do have left, I want, because I've noted, if we look at this, there is a lot of challenges, but there are the opportunities. Does anyone, want to speak to that? Want the panelists to be heard, or panelists, in this world of, that's not always easy, but of opportunity, be it, be it the pandemic itself. I was taking all sorts of notes here, about, recovery and recovery and beyond, and this, all those cliches about the new normal as we move forward. Participants, is there one piece of advice? Panelists, is there one thought you have? I sort of open the floor here and might actually start people as necessary.
Well, Leah, if I may, apologies I didn't get to talk about Jen Harbour's very good points. I guess I missed the mute button a couple of times. But
Sorry,
I just wanted to
go ahead.
No, thank you. Just wanted to say that, Jen, your point about why is it Indigenous handcrafted textiles and apparels? Like, why is it so narrow? It doesn't make any sense. And I don't have a good answer. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me either. But I think it does show a bit of a, if I may, a bit of a lack of imagination. But I can tell you that really going to your point and to Jason's point, is that when you have more voices, you have great understanding. And I can tell you that when Global Affairs Canada undertakes trade negotiations, that's when you have the text being developed with Canada as well as those other countries. And we found in the past that when you have Indigenous voices involved in those discussions, presenting to the chief negotiators, it really helps to change their perspective and help change the course of the negotiation. So, as we go forward, as the CCB tries its darndest to influence the flow of those negotiations, having your voices as part of that conversation, I think will be very critical. And I do hope that a lot of you here today will also take me up on my offer, maybe shoot me a message saying, yeah, I'd love to input on these kinds of things, because we don't want to end up with texts that are just so narrow that no one can really squeeze in there and take advantage of it. We want to make it as broad as possible to make sure that as many businesses can take advantage of that and help support the prosperity and well-being of the community. So I really do hope that you'll take me up on my offer, because I want to let you know that the offer is very much genuine and my hands are very much open to work with you on that. Rich.
Patrick. Todd, go ahead. You're on mute, Todd. You're on mute. No, you're turning your camera on and off?
No, he's not muted now. Todd, talk to us.
Go ahead, Todd.
Todd, do you know sign language?
Todd speaking, Alicia and Alicia, sorry I keep doing that today, and Beth, do you guys, any last comments here as we wrap up? Not necessary, but want to give you the floor.
I'll give a quick comment, and my thoughts are kind of half baking in my head, so I was hoping other people would speak before me before a final comment, because there's been so much that's been shared on the call that I've really appreciated. I just want to echo again that I think from an industry standpoint and from a company standpoint, we cannot continue to operate the way that we typically have. We have companies that come in, mining companies, we come into an area, we put in these agreements with different communities. They're generally pretty legal based, legal heavy. They're heavy documents for everyone involved to put together. And I think as we're seeing a shift with government, with legislation, with UNDRIP being more and more prevalent, with the opportunities from the government and Indigenous communities to partner more, we have a massive obligation as an industry to stop and listen and understand the context that we're now working in. I think mining has previously really been a little bit.
Add a quick point.
We have been essentially just, we don't have a great reputation. That's what it comes down to, is we don't have a great reputation, and we need to start improving that. And I think we are being watched more. There is bigger accountability being put on companies, which I think is appropriate. And I think, again, Jason, listening to you, I would love to get on the phone with you and understand what you offer, understand what the greater context is around you and what you've been doing in the mining sphere.
Okay, good.
Because we certainly do need to we need to act differently, and we need to
I'm not
be partnering differently.
doing this on the phone. So yeah, so thanks.
So Todd, we do, yeah,
thanks
so
very
we do hear you
much
now because you're talking to someone else.
I do.
Okay, try slowly. We're going to go to
Are
Todd
you
and then to
okay?
Alicia, and then I'm going to wrap it up here. Again, please. Todd, we're going to pause you here. We'll see it. Todd. No, it's coming in on not even on a delay. So Alicia, I'm going to give you the floor. And Todd, this worked last time when we saved you to last. So Alicia, I'll give you the floor and then head over to Todd.
Thank you. I just want to applaud Jason and Jen for sharing their experience, because for those of us that are having broader conversations with government, with businesses, as in large corporate Canada, and especially I'm wearing my co-chair of the CCAB hat here, and thinking about the work that we do, Patrick and I and Tabitha and the crew. It's very important for us to hear the individual experience and to hear about the barriers. And I find it unfortunate what the rules are with respect to export and it being crafts, etc., because that to me feels like we're still expected to play within a box where everybody likes us. And we are so much more than that. And we have so much more to offer the economy than that. And so, you know, these are really important conversations. And I just want to thank everybody for their comments and for the insights.
I just want to take the opportunity first and foremost to thank EDC as the sponsor today. I want to thank our panelists for taking the time and offering up insights and you know, being here and putting yourselves out here. And that same goes for the participants, all of the participants today. We thank you as well.